I woke to the sound of someone upset, not with sorrow, but with irritation. "We're not even her real kids," my son said, sharp and casual, like he was talking about a stranger on the news. "Why should we take care of her?" Then I heard my daughter, her voice like frost. "I just hope she doesn't make it. It would be easier. The estate's almost ready anyway." The words sliced through the morphine fog like glass. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My arms felt full of sand, tubes coiled across my chest. Somewhere behind me, the machines beeped slow and steady. The sound of a life I wasn't sure I wanted back. They were standing at the foot of the bed. I could sense it. Close enough to touch me, but so far from ever seeing me as their mother. "She didn't even legally adopt us," he added. "She just married Dad. That doesn't mean we owe her anything." The nurse cleared her throat. "Maybe you should step out. This isn't the place." "Whatever," my daughter muttered, heels clacking as they walked away. I stared at the ceiling tiles, pretending to still be unconscious, pretending I hadn't just heard the people I'd raised since they were in diapers casually wish me gone. And I remembered the last Thanksgiving. I'd made their favorite dishes. Even got up at 5 a.m. to bake that cursed pecan pie he always said he liked. She never showed up. He came late and left early, complaining about traffic. But this was different. This was clarity. The accident had come out of nowhere. Or at least that's what I believed until this moment. The brakes gave out on a downhill curve. No rain, no oil slick, just metal and glass and then black. And now here I was, hooked up like a science experiment, listening to the two people I loved most in the world talk about me like I was a burden they couldn't wait to bury. I wanted to scream. I wanted to sit up and ask them who taught them to tie their shoes, who held them the night their father passed away, who scraped together enough love to make them feel whole again after their mother walked out. But I didn't. I lay still. Because now I knew. They weren't mine. Not in the ways that counted. Not in the ways I had hoped would matter when I was old and broken, and laying in a hospital bed with no one else to speak for me. They were my late husband's children by blood. But mine only when it was convenient. Mine when they needed dinner, a ride, a shoulder to cry on. Not now, not when I was the one in need. And something in me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet, brutal finality of a door that locks from the inside. They thought I was dying. Good. Let them believe that. Because the woman they thought they could manipulate, use, discard, she was gone. And the one waking up in her place? She wasn't interested in playing anymore. Before the IVs. Before the hospital gown. Before their eyes glazed over like I was already gone. There were bedtime songs and sticky fingers clutching mine in grocery store aisles. There was laughter. There was a time they called me Mama. I used to live in a house full of sound. A cluttered, comfortable kind of chaos. Shoes left at the door, cereal boxes always open, backpacks dumped in the hallway like they expected someone else to clean it all up. And someone did. I did. I hadn't always planned to be anyone's mother. I met Richard in my late 30s. I'd already let go of the dream of having children of my own. But he came with two. A boy and a girl, both under 5, both shell-shocked and silent when their biological mother vanished into her new life overseas. I wasn't legally bound to them. No signatures, no judge's stamp, just their tiny hands wrapped around my scarf that first winter, and the whispered, "Mama?" when nightmares crept in. That's all it took. Richard had been kind. Tired, but kind. He worked long hours and left most of the parenting to me. He never pressured me to adopt them formally. "It's just paperwork," he said once. "They know who loves them." Maybe that was the beginning of the lie. Thinking love was enough. I look back now and realize how invisible I became in my own home. Slowly, gently, like steam escaping through a crack. One minute I was reading bedtime stories and folding their clothes. The next I was a shadow they barely acknowledged at dinner. They got older, and I got smaller. He passed away 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and cruel. I was the one who found him collapsed in the garden, the hedge clippers still in his hands. They were in college by then, barely visiting, always too busy. At the funeral, they clung to me like they'd never let go. That was the last time I remember feeling like I belonged to them. After that, it was all slow withdrawal. Phone calls turned into texts. Texts turned into silence. They came around on holidays sometimes, asked about the will more than they asked about my health. Always polite, always smiling, until they thought I couldn't hear them anymore. I keep seeing the way my son stood at the foot of that hospital bed, his arms crossed like a lawyer, weighing the pros and cons of a settlement, not a flicker of concern in his eyes. She's not our real mom. You know what that told me? They were just waiting, like wolves at a gate. And all this time I thought we were still a family. That maybe I'd been too sensitive. That their distance was just adulthood, not detachment. I see it clearly now. They loved the home I made, the meals I cooked, the structure I gave. But they didn't love me, not the way I loved them. That kind of truth settles heavy. It doesn't scream, it sinks. But it also frees, because if love didn't bind them to me, then obligation sure as hell won't bind me to them. Let them talk about estates. Let them whisper about timelines and death certificates. They think they've already won. They don't know I rewrote the ending 2 months ago. They don't know the house they're waiting for doesn't belong to them anymore. And they don't know who's about to show them exactly what a forgotten woman can do, with nothing but time, a pen, and the will to survive. I couldn't move much, but my mind did lapse. One blink at the ceiling tile, and I was back in the kitchen holding a paper plate while they ran around the table with peanut butter on their cheeks. They were so small then. My girl would curl up in my lap like she was trying to disappear into me. My boy used to hide his face in my coat and whisper, "Don't leave yet." And I didn't. I never did. That was the cruelest part. How fully I stayed. Even when their mother left without so much as a bag packed. Even when Richard started coming home later and later, handing me receipts for school uniforms I never asked for and saying, "They're yours now too." I never flinched. I dug in. I stayed through the tantrums, the teenage silence, the passive-aggressive dinners. I stayed through braces and breakups, report cards and birthday candles. Every lost tooth, every scraped knee, every stupid parent-teacher conference where I sat smiling while they called me stepmother and I just nodded like it didn't sting. They didn't know I cried in the laundry room, that I'd hold their tiny socks and wonder how love could make you feel so full and so invisible at the same time. But now I was just some woman taking up space in a hospital bed. I still remember the last time either of them said, "I love you." It was in passing, tossed over a shoulder like spare change. I held on to it for weeks like it meant something. But looking back, it was just habit. Like brushing your teeth or saying "bless you" after a sneeze. They stopped calling regularly after their father passed away. I assumed it was grief. It wasn't. They'd gotten what they came for. His last name, his money, the image of a family. What was I after that? A reminder, a placeholder, the woman who knew where the tax files were. I stopped trying to reach out a year ago, just to see what would happen. Nothing happened. No birthdays. No thinking of you, Mama. Not even a "did you eat today?" I got the message. So I started remembering, not the story I told myself, but the one that actually played out, the cold glances. The way my daughter rolled her eyes anytime I said no. How my son started putting locks on drawers in the office after I asked if everything was okay with his finances. I remembered how I overheard them talking last December after I offered to help pay off her car. "She's loaded," she whispered to him, thinking I was asleep upstairs. "She just wants to use it to control us." They made it sound like kindness was a trap. They made me sound like a threat. And I still baked them a pecan pie. Because I thought if I just kept loving them, they'd come back. But love isn't a boomerang. You don't throw it out and wait for it to circle back. Sometimes it just drops in the dirt, ignored. And now here I was, in a sterile bed, with the beeping of machines instead of voices. Alone. Except, I wasn't completely alone. There was something else there now. Anger. Not rage, not bitterness. Something quieter, tighter. A kind of clean resolve that settles in when you realize no one's coming to save you. And maybe, just maybe, you're the only one who ever truly did. They may have forgotten who I was, but I hadn't. And I still had time. 2 months ago, I sat in a beige leather chair across from a man named Russell Kim. He was younger than I expected. Maybe 40, polished, with sleeves too crisp for someone who works with grief all day. Most people don't change their wills unless something big happens, he said, tapping his pen. Something had happened. It wasn't dramatic, just a sound that shouldn't have hurt. Laughter. I'd been walking down the hallway, carrying a basket of folded towels to my daughter's old room. They were visiting for the weekend. I overheard them in the living room. My son laughing, full-bellied and careless, saying, "Just give it a couple more years. She'll croak, and we'll split the house." Then she snorted, and added, "Bet she leaves it to a cat or some local library out of spite." And they laughed again, like children giggling behind a locked door. That was the moment I knew the story I'd built in my head didn't match the one they were telling about me. So I went to Russell. I didn't cry. I didn't explain. I just handed over the old documents: will, deed, policy. Then I opened my purse and took out a single photograph. It was of me and April, my goddaughter. From the year her mother passed, I took her in for 6 months while her father tried to stay clean. She was 6 at the time, sticky fingers, wide eyes, always calling me her backup mama. She's 32 now, married, works for the women's shelter 3 blocks from my old church, sends me letters on real paper, the kind that smell faintly like citrus, always signs them, "Still your girl. Love, April." Russell glanced at the photo. "You want her listed?" "No," I said. "I want her to get everything." He looked up slowly. "Everything? Everything. The house, the stocks, the life insurance. Even the pearl earrings I've worn only twice, but kept in a velvet pouch like a promise." I'd made peace with it in that moment. Love may not have a bloodline, but cruelty has a pattern. And I wasn't going to leave my life's work to people who watched me limp and still reached for the vault. Russell didn't ask questions. He just started typing. By the time I left, the new documents were signed, sealed, and stored. The originals, shredded. My instructions were airtight, not a dime to either child, and an automatic transfer to the local shelter if April couldn't be located within 30 days of my passing. "You sure they won't contest?" I asked. He gave a slow smile. "Only if they enjoy wasting money losing." Good, I thought. Let them try. I never told them about the meeting. Let them believe what they wanted. Let them eye the furniture, estimate the land value, whisper to each other about when the paperwork would be settled. Let them laugh. Because now, I was smiling too. The kind of smile that doesn't come from spite, but from having nothing left to lose and everything left to protect. I didn't need them to love me anymore. I just needed them to know they didn't break me. Grace had lived across the street since before the kids were tall enough to reach the doorknob. She wasn't nosy, just watchful. The kind of neighbor who noticed a package left too long on the porch, or a porch light that stayed off 3 nights in a row. She was the first person I told after Richard passed away. I remember her standing in my kitchen with a grocery bag full of lemons and ginger, her voice quiet as a hymn. "They'll look to you now," she said, nodding toward the hallway where both children were holed up in their rooms. "But you have to look after yourself too." Back then, I thought she meant grief. I didn't realize she saw the whole thing unraveling long before I did. It was Grace who started paying attention to my son's sudden interest in mail. He'd swing by on weekends, always with some excuse. Just checking on the furnace, or making sure you locked the back gate. But he never lingered. He'd go straight to the mail slot, pull everything out, flip through it like a scavenger scanning for a prize. Grace saw it all from her front window. Said he didn't even look up once to wave. "He doesn't act like a son," she said over tea one afternoon. "He acts like an auditor." I laughed. It sounded bitter. Maybe he's both. Then came the day he asked me about the deed. Just casually, over coffee. "Hey, do you still have that paperwork from when Dad put the house in your name? I can help you organize stuff if you want. You know, simplify things." He said it with a smile. That too practiced one he got from Richard. The one that looked like charm to strangers, but always meant agenda to me. I told him I'd think about it. He left 5 minutes later. That evening, Grace texted me. Saw him circling your mailbox again after he left. Took a photo just in case. Want me to keep watch? I didn't answer at first, but I left the porch light on for her that night, like we used to do during storms when the kids were little and afraid of thunder. She took it as a yes. After that, she started documenting everything. His car showing up without warning. The doorbell cam footage from her Ring system. Every moment he stood at my fence but didn't knock. She called it just in case, but we both knew. Then my daughter showed up one afternoon while I was out back trimming the roses. She didn't even come through the gate. Just leaned over the fence, all soft smiles and breezy concern. Hey, I was just wondering if you ever need help with the mortgage stuff. Like, if it gets overwhelming, I'm happy to take it off your hands. I blinked. I own the house outright. Oh, right. I forgot. But still, Dad always said I was the organized one. That wasn't what Richard used to say. Not even close. She left with a hug that didn't linger. The next day, Grace called. She came by too. Stayed in the car for 20 minutes before walking up. Thought you should know. I'll write it down. That was when it hit me. I hadn't told Grace what I'd overheard in the hospital. I hadn't told her I'd changed the will. I hadn't told her I was quietly slipping out from under all of it. But she knew. She saw what I didn't want to see, that the children I raised weren't here to help. They were circling. And she had decided, without asking, to be my witness. I never asked her to. But in that moment, I knew one thing. They weren't going to get away with it. Not this time. The nurses thought I was sleeping. I was good at that now. Still, silent, careful not to react when people said things they shouldn't have near someone with a pulse. It had been 2 weeks since the crash. They kept using the word accident, a deer, maybe, or slick roads, a worn brake pad. These were the excuses, clean and tidy. But I remember the sound, not of impact, of absence. There was nothing when I pressed the brake, nothing but the hollow clang of metal, the silence of resistance refusing to arrive. I knew that feeling. I knew something was wrong. But grief makes you doubt your own instincts, until you start putting the pieces together. I started with the memory of my son holding my keys last month. That smug, casual, "I'll go check the tire pressure for you, Mom." He didn't ask, just took them and walked out to the driveway, like he owned every piece of my life. I barely thought of it at the time. That's how good they were. Good at making every intrusion seem helpful. Then my daughter? She borrowed my car the week before, said hers was low on gas, brought mine back with the mirrors out of place, and the seat pushed so far forward I could barely climb in. I thought it was inconsiderate. Now I knew better. There had been a soft click when I drove that morning. Nothing loud. Just enough to raise the hairs on the back of my neck. The kind of detail you forget until you're lying in a hospital bed with nothing but time and a long list of new questions. So I did what I always do. I observed. When they visited the first time after the crash, they didn't ask about the car. Not once. No. What happened? Or, was anyone else involved? Just one question. So what happens if you can't live alone anymore? That's when I knew. They weren't scared I'd pass away. They were scared I'd linger. I stayed still, watching the nurses come and go. One of them, Clara, was gentle. The kind that moves slow on purpose. The kind that notices when someone's pretending. She took my vitals one afternoon and paused at the foot of my bed. "You're aware, aren't you?" she said softly. I didn't blink, just the smallest nod. Clara leaned closer. Then maybe it's time to let someone else be aware too. That night, I tapped 3 fingers against her palm. It was all I could do. Her eyes widened, just a little. The next morning, a man showed up without a clipboard or a stethoscope. He wasn't wearing scrubs, just a navy windbreaker and quiet shoes. He stood by the window, hands in his pockets. Clara came in, said only one word. "Visitor." He looked at me. "Name's Elliot," he said. "You hired me once during your divorce. You remember?" I blinked again. Slowly. He took that as yes. "Clara said you can't talk yet. That's okay. I'm good at reading silence." He opened a folder, slipped in a photo of my car on the tow lot. Zoomed in on the brake line. Something was cut, he said. Clean, straight. Someone wanted it to look old. But it's not. This was recent. This was deliberate. I felt it then. Not fear. Relief. Because now it wasn't a suspicion. It was a fact. He glanced around the room, then leaned close. I've already pulled security footage from the hospital and your street cameras. Got a contact in traffic surveillance. We'll find who did this. You just get stronger. And then he smiled. The kind of smile you give someone who's not supposed to be awake, but is. Hell of a family you've got, he muttered. No, not family. Not anymore. My fingers barely worked, but Claire understood them better than anyone. We developed a language without ever writing it down. 3 taps meant yes. 1 long drag across her palm meant get Elliot. A slow blink followed by a closed fist meant don't let them in. She never asked too many questions, just nodded like she'd already decided whose side she was on. That's the thing about people who've seen real pain. They stop looking for permission to do the right thing. Elliot came every other day, always during the lunch shift when the floor was busy, when no one paid attention to the quiet woman in room 219. I never spoke, but I didn't have to. He laid out photos like puzzle pieces on the rolling tray beside my bed. One showed my daughter's car pulling into my driveway the night before the crash, time-stamped at 11:14 p.m. She told me she was out of town. Another showed my son inside the hospital lounge, logging into the visitor Wi-Fi while I was still unconscious, pulling up a document on his laptop titled Advanced Directive Template. He didn't even have the decency to hide it. Smart, Elliot said one day, tapping the folder where my new will was safely stored. Changing the beneficiaries was your best move. I filed a certified copy already. Even if they burn the original, it won't matter. I blinked twice, the thank you he'd learned to accept. Then came the next part, harder, riskier. I need your signature, he said softly. Just one. We'll file for legal protection under elder endangerment. If they try to access your assets again, or attempt another accident, it becomes a felony, not just suspicion. Clara waited until night shift, when the corridor lights were dim and no one was checking vitals. She wheeled in a clipboard, a single sheet clipped tight at the top. My hand shook so badly it barely looked like a name. But it was enough. Enough to start a paper trail. Enough to say, I see you. I'm not as helpless as you think. The next morning, my son showed up. He wore a black polo and a performance of concern. In his hands was a small bouquet of daisies, the kind they sell at gas stations. Hey, Ma, he said, like he hadn't called me a liability 2 weeks earlier. Looking good, got you some flowers, thought they'd cheer up the place. I didn't move. I didn't smile. He sat down anyway. Started talking about real estate values, saying maybe it was time to start thinking seriously about options. I counted the freckles on his arm just to keep from screaming. He glanced toward the monitors and lowered his voice. Me and Aaron were talking. We'd take good care of the house, you know. You don't have to worry about the taxes or maintenance anymore. That was what he came for. Not to see me. Not to ask if I could walk again. Not to say I'm glad you survived. Just to measure the walls he already thought were his. He didn't notice Clara step in behind him. Didn't see her subtly unplug the audio recorder from under the bed once he left. You did great, she whispered, slipping it into her pocket. He just gave us everything we need. And for the first time since I opened my eyes in that room, I let myself imagine a life past this bed. A life not wrapped in machines and silence. Not hunted. Not owned. Not waiting to be erased by the people I once fed with my hands. They thought I was asleep. They thought I was finished. But I was only beginning. They came dressed in black. He wore a charcoal suit he probably hadn't dry cleaned since their father's funeral. She had on a blouse that looked expensive, but wrinkled like she hadn't planned to care too much. I'm sure they thought the smudged mascara would sell it. The grief act. But they were late. 4 days too late. They walked into the hospital lobby like they already owned the place. Not a question between them. Just assumptions that the paperwork would be waiting, The nurse would hand over a folder, and all they'd have to do was sign on dotted lines with freshly feigned sorrow. They didn't know I'd walked out the night before, not under my own power, not yet, but in a wheelchair, covered in a navy quilt Grace had sewn herself. Clara wheeled me to the private car Elliot arranged. One signature and a forged discharge from an outside physician. A quiet exit, like a woman slipping out of her own funeral. Because that's what it was. They came to mourn a woman they believed was gone. But they weren't grieving, they were salivating. A young receptionist in blue scrubs met them at the desk. "Room 219?" my daughter asked, voice soft, almost sweet. "We're here to collect her things and speak to someone about next steps." The girl typed something into the computer. Her brow furrowed. "Room 219 was discharged last night. Already taken care of." "Taken care of?" my son repeated. His voice cracked right where guilt should have lived. "By who?" She didn't say. All arrangements were made in advance. Her lawyer sent everything. My daughter blinked. "Lawyer?" The receptionist nodded. "Russell Kim. He left this envelope for you." That's when their smiles cracked. She handed over a flat manila envelope. No return address, no warmth. Just wait. They opened it right there in the corridor, their fingers greedy even as their faces tried to stay composed. Inside was a letter. My letter. "You always assumed I wouldn't outlast your patience. You were wrong. You always assumed silence meant permission. It didn't. I know everything. And I left you nothing. No signature. No affection. Just one final line, underlined once in blue ink. I may have raised you, but I no longer claim you." Witnesses say she dropped the letter. He bent to pick it up, but not before everyone saw it. Not before a passing nurse paused, then looked away quickly. The kind of look reserved for someone watching a tower collapse in slow motion. They didn't leave immediately. They argued in the hallway, hushed at first, then louder, accusing each other of being sloppy, of talking too much, of not checking the damn brakes properly. The same brakes they swore were just bad luck. The same accident they thought no one would survive, let alone question. But I was watching. From Grace's attic window, 2 houses down and 3 feet higher, propped up by pillows, sipping tea from a travel mug, every word floating up through the cracked vent she'd left open for me to hear. She sat beside me, knitting slowly. "You sure you want to stay for this part?" she asked. I didn't answer. Because I needed to see it, needed to see the moment it dawned on them. They hadn't just lost the house, they'd lost me. Not the woman in the bed, the one with the pen. The one who left before they even thought to say goodbye. They pulled up to the house like they still owned it. Her Lexus parked crooked in the driveway, his truck idling behind like they were afraid someone might take their spot if they didn't hurry. The engine barely stopped before they jumped out. He went straight for the front door, jiggling the knob like it might suddenly remember him. It didn't. Deadbolt. Reinforced. The porch had changed too. New lockbox. Brass plaque bolted beside the doorbell that read, "This property is under legal review. Access restricted. For all inquiries, contact Kim and Associates." He stared at it like it had personally betrayed him. She walked around to the back, calling his name like it was a fire drill. "It's locked. Everything's locked." Of course it was. I made sure of that. Russell's firm had dispatched a property manager that morning. He met them in the driveway, pressed suit, clipboard in hand. Didn't smile. "I'm here on behalf of Ms. Albright," he said. They blinked. "She's alive?" my daughter asked, like I was a ghost that had ruined her weekend. "Very much," he replied, flipping the page. "And quite lucid. Would you like me to read her message aloud?" They didn't respond. So he did. "Effective immediately, this property is no longer within your legal access or interest. Do not attempt entry. Any trespassing will be reported. A copy of the new deed has been mailed to your last known address. You were not listed as heirs. Do not return." He handed them a sealed envelope, same cream paper, same blunt weight. My son took it like a man accepting a parking ticket he didn't believe he deserved. My daughter didn't touch it, just stood there, arms crossed, chewing the inside of her cheek like it might stop the shame from leaking out. Then the manager nodded, got into his car, and left them standing there. Two adult children, dressed in funeral black with nowhere to go and nothing to claim. They sat in the driveway for almost an hour, arguing at first, then silent. At some point, she opened the envelope. I watched from the attic window again. One room down, across the fence line, Grace by my side with a mug of cocoa and knitted judgment in her lap. My daughter read the letter 3 times. Her mouth moved with the words. Then she threw it, not just tossed through like the paper had burned her hand. I knew which part got her. You never once called me Mom when no one was watching. My son didn't speak. He just pulled out his phone, turned away, and made a call. He paced back and forth in front of the garden beds I once planted by hand. The roses looked better than they had in years. Grace smiled, watching them from the vent like it was a stage play. You really think they thought you'd just be waiting? I think, I whispered, they thought I'd pass away the same way I lived with them. Quietly. But quiet doesn't mean weak. And now the silence was mine. Inside the house, everything was untouched, but nothing belonged to them anymore. Not the couch they fought over when they were 12, not the photo albums in the hall closet, not even the fridge magnets they once bought me for Mother's Day. They'd come home to take something. Instead, they found something had been taken from them. Entitlement, access, assumption. And for the first time, they stood in front of my home as strangers, locked out, exactly where they left me. The argument started in whispers. I could barely hear them from Grace's attic at first, just the rise and fall of syllables slipping into sharper edges. But then he slammed the car door, and that was the end of pretending. You said she wouldn't change it, he snapped. She wouldn't have if you hadn't been so obvious, she fired back, pacing near the mailbox like it owed her something. Do you think she didn't hear you in the hospital? You're the one who said we should hurry things along. I never said sabotage the car, you idiot. So that was it. The mask was off. And it wasn't guilt that had them unraveling. It was fear. He backed away from her, breathing hard, running a hand through his hair like maybe panic would untangle into logic if he just paced fast enough. You're the one who kept pushing to check the mail every week, he hissed. You practically lived at her fence line. And you're the one who brought up power of attorney at her birthday dinner. Jesus, Nathan. Could you have been less subtle? Grace raised her eyebrows beside me. So he's the type who ruins birthdays and breaks. I didn't laugh, but my hands clenched around the mug. Below us, they kept spiraling. She was supposed to leave us the house, he said, voice cracking, pacing now. She raised us. No, my daughter said, cold and flat. She raised you. I always knew she wasn't really our mother. That stopped him. He looked at her like he didn't recognize her. Or maybe like he finally did. And yet here you are, just as broken, pissed off as I am. Don't you dare, she snapped. He pointed at the letter still crumpled in her hand. You told me she'd never change it. You said she was too sentimental, that she still saw us as her babies. Well, she muttered, looking away. I guess she finally saw us for what we are. That silence was colder than anything I'd heard yet. No tears, no apologies. Just the weight of two people who built their futures on someone else's grave, and had the nerve to act surprised when the ground gave out beneath them. He got in his truck first, drove off fast, tires skidding against the curb like he thought speed might outrun the consequences. She stayed a little longer, pacing, digging through her purse like a checkbook might suddenly materialize a second chance. Then she sat down on the steps, my steps, and lit a cigarette she wasn't supposed to have. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she just stared at the door. And for the first time, I saw it on her face. Loss. Not just of the house, or the money, but of the story she told herself, that no matter how far she strayed, she could always come back, and I'd be there. Waiting. Still, Mom. Still hers. That story was gone now. She left the cigarette on the step and walked away. I watched until her figure disappeared around the hedges I once planted with their father. Back when we believed family was something that could be grown with enough sun and patience. Grace turned to me after a long moment. You ready for what comes next? I sipped my tea. They started this, I'm just finishing it. Because they still didn't know what I knew. I had proof, witnesses, and a PI who didn't sleep. They weren't just losing me, they were about to lose everything they'd built on my silence. Russell didn't ask questions when I showed up at his office with Elliot and a folder that made even him blink. It was early, just past 8, and the receptionist wasn't even at her desk yet. We sat in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the city, all that sky and glass reflecting back a version of myself I hadn't seen in years. Calm, straight-backed, not shaking anymore. "I'll need to verify every piece," Russell said, spreading the contents across the table like evidence in a trial. "But from what I'm seeing, this isn't just endangerment, it's conspiracy." Elliot nodded once. "I've got timestamps. The hospital cam footage lines up with the car shop's inspection. There's no ambiguity." I leaned forward. "What happens now?" Russell folded his hands. "Lawyer. Serious. First, we file a protective order. Immediate. If they so much as step foot near the property again, they're in violation. Second, we hand this off to the state attorney. Third, if you want it public, we can go to the press." I didn't speak for a long moment. Because it wasn't about headlines, it was about consequences. Something they'd never had to taste before. Not when they lied. Not when they manipulated. Not when they slowly turned the woman who raised them into a glorified ATM with a heart. "They don't get to bury me alive," I said quietly. "And they don't get to walk away like it never happened." Russell's eyes flicked over the break line photo. A clean slice, undeniable. "No, they don't." He slid over a final page, the one I'd asked him to draw up weeks ago. A letter addressed to the district attorney. Signed, notarized, sealed. I read it again before I picked up the pen. "I, Margaret Albright, hereby submit formal testimony and accompanying evidence to support charges of attempted vehicular IFE threatening act, financial fraud, and elder endangerment against Nathan Albright and Aaron Graves." My hand didn't shake when I signed it. Russell nodded, folding it carefully into a black envelope. "We'll deliver this by courier within the hour." Elliot pulled out one last item from his bag, a USB drive. Security cam footage. The whole conversation they had on the porch. They didn't know the house next door was still wired. That was Grace's doing. She'd installed the cameras back when her brother's son got arrested for breaking into her shed. Said she never took them down because people get bold when they think no one's watching. Now it would be the nail in their coffin, not mine. I left Russell's office with copies of everything. Not because I planned to use them again, but because I had learned this the hard way. Silence is an instrument if it's backed by proof. And I had all of it. That afternoon, I sat in a borrowed cottage 3 hours away, tucked against a hillside where the air smelled like pine and freedom. No neighbors. No children, no noise, just me. A lawyer on standby, a PI on retainer, and a future with no more keys handed to ungrateful hands. When the letters arrived at their doors, one for each of them, I didn't have to be there to watch the reactions. Elliot said my son turned pale before even opening it. My daughter tried to call me twice that night. I didn't answer. I was too busy recording a video. My face, clear and steady in the camera. "My name is Margaret Albright. If you're watching this, it means the last lie has fallen." Then I reached for the flash drive and pressed upload because I wasn't hiding anymore. I left behind one teacup, 2 framed photos, and an old cardigan that still smelled faintly of rosemary. Everything else I took with me, or burned in my name. Disappearing isn't what people think it is. It's not hopping a train with a scarf over your head like some movie fugitive. It's paperwork, stamps, 3 notarized copies of one cold decision. I'm done. Russell handled the logistics. He filed the legal name change under a protective clause for victims of attempted familial harm. It wasn't easy, but the moment the evidence became public record, no judge blinked. New ID, new license, new address sealed. Elliot took care of the transfer. Quiet sale of the house to a trust. The trust handed it to the new owner for exactly $1. April. The goddaughter they laughed at. The one they said was just a phase when I took her in for 6 months after her mom passed. The one who used to write me letters even after she got married. The one who called me Mama Mar long after my own children stopped saying anything at all. She cried when she got the call, not because of the house. She would have lived in a tent if it meant helping, but because I trusted her with it. "I'll take care of it," she said through the phone, voice breaking. "I'll make it mean something." "You already do," I whispered. Then I hung up. Because goodbyes are for people who might come back. I had no intention. I took the train at dawn. A slow one. No ID required. Just a ticket and cash, and a window seat, with sunlight filtering in like quiet forgiveness. No one looked at me twice, which was the point. Somewhere past the 4th station, I turned my phone off and dropped it into the river when we crossed the bridge. One final ripple. No signal. No trace. Gone. By noon, I arrived at the edge of a town no one talks about. A small cluster of homes wrapped in forest, built for women like me. Not victims. Not escapees. Survivors. It's not a shelter. It's a sanctuary. They call it Second Bloom. There's a sign at the gate. Hand-painted, wooden, cracked a little from weather. It says, "You are not what they did." I stood there for a while. Then I stepped through. Inside, I met Rosa, 63. Used to be a school principal before her son forged her signature on 5 refinance loans. Margaret, not me, another one, 74, walked out of her own home with a purse full of receipts and not a single apology from the husband she buried alone. We don't tell stories right away. We sit in gardens. We plant tomatoes. We write things down we may never send. And we heal, slowly, with our own names. The day after I arrived, the letters went out. To the state, to the press, to every contact I had left in Richard's old address book, the ones who still believed the kids were saints, the ones who asked me at funerals why they hadn't called more. They know now. Elliot confirmed both were served. He sent me one final photo, my daughter being led from her office in handcuffs, head down. My son, the same afternoon, taken from his condo by 2 plainclothes officers. They tried to blame each other, of course they did. But the recordings, the break line photos, the emails, my signature, all of it saying the same thing. Fatal intent. And now? They're the ones being erased. Elliot said the police didn't even knock at first. They waited. Surveillance teams watched my son's condo for 3 days, making sure he didn't pack a bag or disappear into one of those sleazy Vegas properties he'd been sniffing around for, quote, real estate opportunities. But Nathan never noticed. He was too busy calling his sister, leaving voicemails he probably thought wouldn't be saved. Don't say anything. They don't have proof. We'll tell them she was confused, that she'd been sick. If you open your mouth, we're both going down. Too late, sweetheart. The knock came at 6:12 a.m. on a Wednesday. A quiet hour, before the world starts performing, before you have time to lie. 2 detectives, 2 badges, 1 warrant. He opened the door shirtless, blinking like the law had never applied to him before. They read him his rights as he reached for his phone. He didn't argue, not at first, just kept saying, "Wait, what?" Like disbelief could undo brake wires and digital signatures. My daughter's arrest came 3 hours later. At her office, she was wearing heels and a smile when they arrived. She tried to step into a meeting room. They stepped in after her. Her assistant, a 20-year-old intern named Mia, called Elliot the next day to say she didn't cry, she didn't scream, she just said, "This can't be happening." But it was happening. To both of them. For once, the consequences were real. No more silence to soak their cruelty. No more mother to cover their sins. No more home to hide inside, like children pretending not to hear the truth knocking. Elliot sent me the arrest videos, not because I asked for them, but because he thought I deserved to see it, the moment power left their bodies. In both clips, I saw something familiar. A flicker in the eyes. Not guilt. Disbelief. They truly never thought I'd fight back. They thought I'd pass away, clinging to their photos, whispering, "But I raised you," while they carved up the life I built, like vultures at a dinner table. But I didn't pass away. I documented, I prepared, I waited, and now it was them standing under the sterile light of judgment. The headlines hit within 24 hours. Siblings arrested in alleged attempt of stepmother erasal over estate. Brake line sabotage. Police release audio and email evidence in shocking family betrayal. The story went viral. Not because I was famous, but because the world understands something about quiet women who survive that were rarely believed until the wreckage becomes undeniable. My inbox at the sanctuary filled with messages. Other women, other not real moms, other nearly forgotten names on leases and documents and wills. One woman wrote, "They used me like a shelf, like I was just a thing that held them until they didn't need me anymore. Thank you for showing me that love without respect is just manipulation in costume." I wrote back. I told her, "Being alone is better than being used." That same day, Grace called me. Her voice sounded younger somehow. "They came by," she said. "Reporters. Sat on the curb like stray dogs sniffing for another quote." I told them the truth. "What'd you say?" she chuckled. I said, "She was quiet, not stupid. You just never saw how sharp a woman gets when she's been cut one too many times." I didn't cry. Not because I didn't feel, but because the tears had already been shed, dried, recycled into ink on affidavits and signatures on justice. They'd been arrested, charged, and exposed. The press conference wasn't my idea, it was April's. She called me 3 days after the story broke, her voice strong but shaking a little at the edges, like she knew what she had to do and wasn't sure the world would listen. "They're painting you like a sad old woman," she said. "One headline called you, 'A tragic recluse taken advantage of by ungrateful stepchildren.' They're missing the point." I didn't answer right away, because I'd lived my whole life trying not to be a tragedy. I'd fed children who weren't mine, paid bills no one thanked me for, stayed quiet through insults that dressed themselves in politeness. I had been many things, but I'd never been sad. Tired? Yes. Used? Without question. But not sad. April took a breath and said, "Let me speak. Let me tell them what you really did." And I told her the truth. "If you do, don't defend me. Defend the women who can't speak yet." She promised. The press conference was held in the garden. My garden. The one they never watered. The one they complained about constantly. The one I planted anyway, season after season. Because beauty should not require permission to exist. April stood there in a navy dress and soft flats. No makeup, but dignity in full display. Behind her stood a poster board with an architectural sketch of the house, newly labeled, "The Albright House for Women, Rebuilding After Familial Betrayal." The reporters leaned in. One woman in the back clutched her notepad like it might explode. April held up the last version of my will, laminated and sealed in a clear folder. This was signed 6 weeks before the incident. It names me as sole beneficiary and stipulates that this house be converted into a transitional sanctuary for women over 50 who have survived financial or emotional betrayal by immediate family members. A reporter shouted, "Was this retaliation?" April didn't flinch. "No, this was reclamation." Flashbulbs clicked. "The media keeps calling this a, quote, family tragedy. That's not what it was. This wasn't about inheritance. It was about entitlement. Two people believed they could exploit a woman's love simply because she once made their lunches." She paused. She raised them. She clothed them. She cried in silence so they wouldn't feel the weight of her sacrifice. And when she finally asked for peace, they tried to erase her for it. Silence. Even the wind stopped. She stepped closer to the mic. "This house will never belong to people who saw love as a transaction. It belongs now to women who were told they didn't count because their name wasn't on a birth certificate, who gave everything and were rewarded with silence, suspicion, or worse." A soft murmur moved through the crowd. "This place will have 10 beds, a garden, a legal aid office, and dignity. Because love without respect isn't love at all, and too many women have been tricked into believing they were lucky to be tolerated." The first applause came from the left, then the center, then everywhere. Not thunderous, but real. She stepped back, and for a moment, I forgot to breathe. From my seat 3 towns over, watching on a borrowed laptop in a quiet library, I saw her lift her head and smile the same way I used to. Not wide, not showy, just steady, like a woman who knows where she came from and who she came for. My house was never theirs. It was always a seed. Now it was blooming. The trial hadn't even started yet, but the punishment had already begun. Their partners left first. Nathan's girlfriend, Jenna, the one who used to call me Mama Mags during dinner parties while scrolling through Instagram, packed her bags 2 days after the arrest. She didn't even leave a note, just changed her number and sent a single text to Elliot's contact. Tell Margaret the first, believe her. As for Aaron, her husband froze the joint accounts the minute the news went live. Didn't even try to argue. He was a banker. He knew a sinking account when he saw one. The courts were slow, but the public moved fast. Clients dropped. Friends fell silent. Neighbors who used to wave stopped waving. They weren't just accused now. They were known. Every group chat they belonged to, gone. Every wine night invite, revoked. No one wanted to be seen siding with the kids who orchestrated a life-threatening plan against their mother figure, over hardwood floors and inherited dishware. It's funny, the very people who once begged me to be patient with them were the first to vanish when the fallout landed. Nathan tried to go online, to post something vague. Family business is complicated. You don't know the whole story, but the comments were relentless. You cut her brakes, Nathan. Tell us which part we don't know. You owe every woman you've ever smiled at an apology. He deleted his account within hours. And Erin? She tried the pity route. One lone interview with a tabloid site. A tearless video with filtered lighting, where she said, "I don't know how everything got so twisted. I loved her. She was like a mother to me." But the video cut to the letter I wrote, the one that ended with, "You never once called me mom when no one else was listening." People remembered that line. It stuck. It stung. And her crocodile tears dried up when former coworkers started leaking emails, the ones where she mocked me, called me the maid who thinks she's a matriarch. Turns out, people pay attention when the wrong woman finally speaks up. The world loves to punish a traitor, especially one who looks polished until the rot starts showing. Grace called again, voice sharp with satisfaction. "I saw her yesterday. Erin. At the pharmacy. She looked thinner. Hollow. Guilt will do that," I said. "No," Grace replied. "It's not guilt. It's emptiness. Because they didn't just lose the house. They lost their version of me. The compliant version. The woman who cleaned up after them and smiled through insults, like she was lucky to be in their lives at all. Without me there to prop it up, that version collapsed. They looked around and realized no one saw them as victims. Not anymore. And the thing about betrayers is this. They think they can rebuild once the smoke clears. But no one trusts someone who turned on blood. Even if it wasn't their blood. Even if it was mine. They sit now in separate cells, waiting for arraignment. Their lawyers are public defenders. Their requests for leniency are laughed at. And I'm sitting on a porch 3 towns over, sipping tea with Rosa, watching the sun bleed across the hills like a slow, soft apology. We don't talk about them anymore. Not out of fear, but because they're irrelevant. I loved them, once. Now they're just names on a docket. And I'm the headline they'll never outrun.